We live in a sea of vulnerability, and it is amongst us all the time.
Full-fledged cyber war is happening here today.
To catch a thief, you've got to be a thief.
You've got to be face to face with them. You can't hide in the shadows.
We're here to spy on foreigners, but we're also here to protect our country.
The secret of success in the espionage business is in keeping your successes secret.
It operates in that slim area between the difficult and the impossible.
And if you want to deter people from doing bad things, you have to be willing to stand up.
We do have potent capabilities. You don't mess with ASD.
Australia has spent decades in declared and in recent times undeclared conflict. Adversaries usually identified, but not always. And while many stories of war are very familiar, some tales remain untold. They have to be when secrecy is key. But now we can reveal how a modest, top-secret unit of military intelligence grew into a world-renowned army of feared cyber warriors. They're talented, they're humble, some are a little bit quirky, but they've silently changed history in conflicts for the past 80 years.
Australia's sophisticated cyber capability has a humble origin in a shed at the back of this Brisbane mansion during World War II.
How did I end up working at Central Bureau? Well, I was put into the cipher unit.
And they asked me, was there any particular area that I'd like to work in the Army? I said, well, my father was the naval signalman in the First World War, and he seemed to enjoy the job. I said, I'll give signals a go.
The next thing we know, we're on the train to Brisbane, and we finish up at 21 Henry Street. And they said, we'd be working in the garage. Well, that was where we were.
That's how I became a garage girl.
Hi-ho, girls, it's 6 o'clock, so snap out of Blanket Bay. You're in the Army now.
We were just girls at 67 AWA barracks.
Joyce Grace and Coral Hines were just 19 when they were selected to work in an ultra top secret military intelligence unit. They became best friends. Nye Rambler was the Brisbane HQ for the US General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander of Allied Forces in the Southwest Pacific.
We were being trusted, and it was the fact that we were trusted with this job that we were there. It was, just so secret.
Don't talk about it outside, don't tell anybody. You can tell them you're in signals, but don't go any further than that. And we sort of knew that there was something special about it.
Nobody knew why we were all coming and hopping out of this big truck and running around to the back of the building. And of course this is where we worked then, and we worked in the garage.
Their job? To decode Japanese radio signals and to encrypt messages to Allied troops stationed north of Australia.
There were 12 cipher machines.
They call them the Typex machine. It was our secret machine. You had to set them up before you could sit down and type what you've got to type.
On the whole, you just got to and plonked away on the Typex, and if it didn't work, you stayed there and fiddle around with it until it did work.
If I saw one, I think I could work it.
After all that time?
Yeah.
To the modern eye, it looks like a really clunky typewriter, but it's actually an ingenious bit of engineering. A Typex machine used by a single operator could receive, decrypt, and then print out messages from the war front. Working in 8-hour shifts around the clock, the garage girls handled some of the most sensitive communications, and while their work was vitally important, they still had lives to live.
Meeting Sandy, that was the most important thing in my life.
Coral met her husband Sandy at Central Bureau. He was in signals too, and was about to be sent to New Guinea when they were introduced by a colleague.
Would have been Joan, and she said, Corporal Hines will tell you what to do. And we laughed about that afterwards. He never did tell me what to do.
Coral fell ill during Sandy's deployment, and the garage girls knew of a way to get a message to him in the jungle using the Typex machine.
It's called padding.
I only did it once.
Padding was where messages, particularly short ones, were lengthened with scraps of irrelevant information in order to confuse the enemy.
We used to put a bit of padding at the beginning and the end of the messages. It just put the enemy off the scent.
But it was just to let Sandy know that Coral was doing well. She was coming out of hospital. Sandy got that little message that I sent, and he carried it around with him, I believe, for a long time. But yes, I think Coral and Sandy did a bit of communicating, little bits on the end.
The Japanese didn't know it, but the Allies had cracked their code, the Typex machine becoming a deadly instrument of war. Radio communications picked up by signalmen like Sandy Hines, decoded by Central Bureau, tracked the movements of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the Imperial Japanese Navy's Commander-in-Chief. Admiral Yamamoto masterminded the 1941 Pearl Harbor attack.
The warlord struck first and hard.
The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Making Japan's great naval strategist America's #1 enemy. The mission to kill him was called Operation Vengeance.
When war comes between Japan and the United States, I shall not be content merely to...
This Yamamoto, this fellow, was going to take a journey from Japan down to New Guinea somewhere.
They worked out the times the planes were going and got the word out.
They had everything. They had the whole lot. The type of machine he would be flying in, and what would be coming with him, our boys and the Americans. They were waiting for him, you know, and they got him.
Shot the big boy down. It was quite a thrill, yes.
What's left of Yamamoto's plane now rusts in a bougainville jungle. But as much as his death was a devastating blow to Japanese morale, the war in the Pacific would drag on for another 2.5 years.
Colonel Tibbets takes the Enola Gay down the runway into the air, beginning the 6.5-hour flight to Japan.
On the 6th of August 1945, American B-29 bomber Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima.
Just 50 seconds later, the Enola Gay is rocked by the blast.
Yes, the fires and things must have been terrible.
As the US bombers retreated, bewildered Japanese naval officers radioed back to Tokyo headquarters. Their report, intercepted by an Australian wireless unit somewhere in the Philippines and decoded back at Central Bureau, has been declassified for the ABC.
Today, 3 B-29s flew over Hiroshima. A terrific explosion accompanied by flame and smoke occurred at an altitude of 500 to 600 meters. The concussion was beyond imagination and demolished practically every house in the city.
The devastation speaks for itself.
The officers grimly reported about 80% of Hiroshima had been wiped out, destroyed or burnt, estimating casualties at 100,000 people. Then this.
Please investigate and report any information concerning this new type of bomb.
Please investigate and report any information concerning this new type of bomb. I like the sound of it.
This new type of bomb was a nuclear bomb that the world hadn't seen.
Oh, yes. Oh, terrible. Oh, I was shocked.
I know it was dreadful. If it hadn't been them, it would have been us. It was just a blessing when it was all over.
At war's end, Coral Hines, Joyce Grace and the rest of the Garage Girls were sworn to secrecy. For 30 years they could tell no one about their work as coders at Central Bureau.
See, Mum and Dad didn't know what I did. I used to just tell people I was in signals. You know, it really just gets a way of life. We really had a very important job, and I think at the time we didn't realise how important it was.
Douglas MacArthur, I think it was, that put the news out that we'd reduced the wartime by 2 years with the work that we'd done. So we must have done something special, and I feel very proud about it.
The Garage Girls had more to be proud of than they could ever have realised. Central Bureau's skills in military code breaking and code making would be honed by others for decades to come, just in time for the digital revolution in our pockets, when their techniques would prove themselves with awesome power in civilian life. And for the first time, we can tell you how.
The 2002 Bali bombings drew Australia deep into the war on terror.
Tonight, dozens of Australians feared dead after a car bomb tears through a nightclub district in Bali. The death toll
202 people killed, including 88 Australians, in explosions at Paddy's Bar and then at the Sari Club across the road.
This is horrendous. I've never seen anything like it. People are burnt everywhere.
The detonation of a smaller bomb outside the US consulate in Denpasar confirmed an anti-West motive.
There was just people with holes in them everywhere. There were people on fire. They were running down the street on fire. There's people screaming for people for help.
The crime scene was what you'd expect from bomb blasts. There were bits and pieces of human flesh blasted into walls. Most of the buildings had lost their roofs. There was an engine of a motor vehicle on the second floor of a building that was 3 blocks away from the blast.
Mick Kelty was Australian Federal Police Commissioner at the time of the Bali bombings.
I received a phone call from General Dibaktia, the head of the Indonesian National Police.
Bahwa Komisioner Mick Kelty ini adalah satu pribadi yang memberikan semangat, support terhadap dilakukannya kerjasama antara AFP dengan Polri ini.
And he asked me how soon I could get some people on the ground.
Kelty had established a trusted relationship with Bactia years before Bali and already had a long-standing friendship with the man appointed to lead the investigation, Made Mangu Pastika.
So it was a very kind gesture on behalf of General Dibaktia to appoint Pastika.
We believe that this was highly organised. The timing involved in this was designed, without a doubt, to maximise the deaths.
Dikagetkanlah semuanya. Bahkan Presiden Megawati pun harus datangi ke Bali untuk melihat peristiwa yang begitu besar.
The enormous crater at the Sari Club, now full of water, challenged AFP forensic experts. So did local authorities' determination to remove the bodies within 24 hours of death, in keeping with the Muslim faith. It was clear this investigation needed some special assistance.
Pastika knew this already. He looked in the skies and he said the answer will come from the skies. Now, I knew that he was a practicing Hindu. I knew that his faith was really important to him. He prayed every day. And I said, you mean from God? And he said, no, from satellites.
The AFP had reached the same conclusion. one of its crime scene investigators found a fragment of a Nokia 5110 mobile phone used to detonate the bomb outside the US consulate. The fragment had the phone's 15-digit serial number, or IMEI number.
The IMEI number is unique to each mobile phone. It never changes, but the SIM card number can change.
Knowing who owned the Nokia phone or who rang it to detonate the bomb were potential leads, but they required the phone data held by Indonesia's mobile provider, Telkomsel. And another important clue had emerged. The Sari Club explosion was so big it had been picked up by seismic sensors, pinpointing the exact moment of its detonation, 11:08 and 31 seconds. The AFP believed the Sari Club explosion, like the one outside the US consulate, had been detonated remotely.
The organisers made sure that these suicide bombers didn't back out at the last minute, so the bombs were being detonated by mobile phones. We knew that if we overlaid the data from the seismic blast with the data from telephone records, that we would be able to pretty much precisely identify what the number was that was dialed that detonated the other bombs.
With the full understanding of General Pustika's team, AFP officers and technicians from Telstra went to the Jakarta headquarters of Telkomsel to request access to the company's mobile phone data. Permission was granted.
The data that Telkomsel had, this was what I would call a gold mine.
But it was a gold mine too rich for the Indonesian or Australian police to mine.
The Australian law enforcement agencies had no capacity to deal with that amount of data. That capability existed with the Defence.
The Defence Signals Directorate, to be precise, an agency that had quietly become expert at analysing massive amounts of data.
How's that useful in an incident like Bali?
Well, it's useful for everything they do, and that's the secret of the Signals Intelligence Organisation. You know, there's a lot of data you need to target the right individuals.
And why had DSD, or the Australian Signals Directorate, as it's now known, become so good at scouring vast amounts of data for specks of gold? Because of places like this, a satellite intercept station near Geraldton in Western Australia, part of the global surveillance network operated by the Five Eyes intelligence partners, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the United Kingdom and the United States.
Geostrategically, Geraldton is very well placed for monitoring the network of satellites that spans across the Indian Ocean and across much of East Asia, and it is incredibly capable of hoovering up massed data from the networks in that space.
Before big data was even mentioned, signals intelligence agencies like ASD were very much in the big data game, and they had clever people who could analyse that and find the needle in the haystacks.
And with those skills, DSD got to work on who was behind the Bali bombings. Its supercomputers at HMAS Harman on the outskirts of Canberra, analysing Telkomsel mobile data generated by tens of millions of people on its national network, making hundreds of millions of calls and text messages.
This was the biggest lead in the investigation and the most important lead in the investigation because it was a pristine piece of evidence that could be looked at and could give immediate results, which is what it did.
Ya memang tidak mudah, rumit sekali saya kalau melihatnya. Karena ribuan nomor telepon itu yang masuk. Tetapi teman-teman mampu bagaimana mengidentifikasi ya dari pola-pola hubungannya.
The Nokia 5110 used to trigger the US consulate blast had received one final call from a number DSD identified in the Telkomsel data. This helped Indonesian police zero in on the caller to that phone, tracking him down through a Bali retailer. His name? Idris. He was the logistics man who'd not only called the Nokia, but bought SIM cards and arranged transport and accommodation for the bombers. DSD's analysis of Idris's calls and texts combined with phone data from the precise moment of the Sari Club explosion, established the Terror Cell's command team, Jemaah Islamiya's operations chief Mukhlas and his field commander Samudra.
Idris was the hub, and the spokes went out from the hub to the rest of the wheel, and the rest of the wheel is what drove the bombings.
DSD, cross-checking exceptional work by Indonesian and Australian investigators on the ground, helped identify the operation's lieutenants, including Amrozi and Ali Imran, brothers of Mukhlas. Next, DSD identified the bomb makers, the recruiter and the suicide bombers who targeted Paddy's Bar and the Sari Club.
That reverse network analysis is critical to unravelling the network of terrorists. And that was a real breakthrough, an extraordinary breakthrough that saw, as I say, trusted collaboration between Australia and Indonesia, the likes of which we'd actually never seen before.
Triangulation of DSD's data allowed the Indonesian and Australian police to geolocate the suspects, the first arrest being Amrozi, dubbed the Smiling Bomber, who was quick to cough up his co-conspirators.
There are many other suspects, Idris, Hudama, also known as Imam Samudra, and two men both known as Umar.
Nah, disinilah peran AEV kepada pengungkapan kasus bom Bali, sehingga jaringan yang tadinya kita hanya temukan satu orang yang namanya Amrozi, kemudian kita bisa bongkar jaringan itu, dan kita baru tahu ada kelompok yang namanya Jemaah Islamiyah.
Some of those people were arrested in towns where there are millions of people. So it was quite a feat in terms of technology, but getting that first arrest and getting those first arrests was so crucial because some of those people cooperated, and we could test their cooperation because we actually had the data.
Bali bombing mastermind Mukhlas attempted to evade detection by regularly swapping SIM cards, not knowing that DSD was tracking him through his phone's unique identifier, leading to his arrest by Indonesian National Police in central Java.
And what we got from DSD and the other Australian government agencies, it was just brilliant.
The agency's work in Bali's civilian streets drew heavily on its military heritage, demonstrating its techniques had evolved. From fighting against communist forces in Korea, in the tough, wet terrains of Vietnam, and through Timor-Leste's turbulent independence, the Signals Directorate never strayed far from its original mission to support defence in war and conflict. So when the war on terror struck in the US, sending Australian forces into the frozen mountains of Afghanistan, inventive ways were devised to trick would-be Taliban fighters away from the battlefield. Some operations allow almost no time for preparation.
That an individual was travelling to Afghanistan with intent to join the Taliban. And at the point that we received this information, this individual was already in the air.
He was someone who was travelling to a far-flung land to engage in acts of terrorism.
July 2012, and a 24-year-old, previously unknown to Australian agencies, is on a plane to Afghanistan. He's been radicalised online and wants to join the Taliban.
We'll call him Ali. He was an interesting fellow. He probably wasn't the brightest guy.
Which proves to be both a benefit and a complication to the mission.
A bunch of different agencies got together and said, what can we do to stop this individual from meeting the Taliban and potentially to get him to turn around and go back home.
The plan is for ASD operator Claire to pose as Ali's Taliban contact and convince the young man to abandon his phone and email address.
It's a requirement to generate an online persona to pretend to be someone that you're not in a way that is convincing to the individual, And in that case, it's how do you draw that individual away from doing something stupid or harmful or an act of terrorism. That sounds really easy, doesn't it? But there's a hell of a lot of work that goes behind that.
Claire, you don't look like a Taliban operative to me, but so how did that work?
No, I don't quite look like a Taliban operative. But next to me I have a team of people. I have a bunch of cultural experts, I have a bunch of language experts.
Her brilliance, of course, was in the moment, responding with the agility and ingenuity needed to, but backed by a great team.
And they help Claire write an email to Ali for him to read when he arrives in Afghanistan.
We must use new email now. Your phone also danger, no use again. Get new and give number here. No call us, we contact you. Be careful about yourself. You in danger place now.
Ali is not quick to respond, nor is he quick to follow instructions.
Brother Hamidullah, I hear from you. Do not be worried. I'm Afghan. Brother, I want to learn Quran and become Mujahid. I understand it is very hard to trust me. My plan was to come to Kandahar and meet the brothers.
We actually thought he was overconfident. We almost wanted to bring him down to put that fear in him.
Australian agencies believe that if Ali isn't killed by the Taliban, he'd be trained to conduct attacks against coalition forces in Afghanistan or return home to commit a terrorist act.
So although I would argue in a theatre like that, a high-risk venture, highly likely he didn't come back. But yes, if he did come back, then he would have new skills that will be applied here in Australia, and that's a concern. So it's important to turn him away from that.
Breaking Ali's communication with the Taliban is critical.
It would kind of ruin an operation if we're in the middle of an operation and a real Taliban guy calls him and goes, yeah, I don't know who you've been talking to, but it's not us.
ASD knows he's used his phone to call a Taliban contact called Tariq. They know too he's still using his old email to contact family back home, and Ali's movements in Kabul are being tracked by another intelligence agency.
Well, that's, again, really important because actually what you see through cyberspace you have to validate in the real world, and actually whilst there's some technical means by which you can validate that, where he is, what he's doing, who's he meeting with, you've got to cross-check that with what he's actually telling you online.
That on-the-ground monitoring of Ali helps shape the next message to him.
Brother, you must change to new email and not use old one again. You need different phone for safety. You not listen to us. Trust will come when we know you. It took us several attempts to get him to do what we wanted him to do. We made the emails much shorter, we made the language much simpler, and we were much more direct in our contact and much more authoritative.
Please forgive me, brother. I understand now. I send you a new number. I would like to live in Afghanistan, but not in Kabul.
It's not the first time Ali has revealed his dislike of Kabul. Preventing him travelling to the Taliban stronghold of Kandahar becomes ever urgent.
We needed to put the fear of God in him, but also at the same time make him think that he was important and make him think that he felt like what he was doing was important and that he was still contributing. We gift you important task for Islamic Emirate. We think maybe you do not understand this task for our seniors.
Go back, inshallah, I will, and collect money, I can. But brother, if you can be more help to explain detail.
Ali doesn't leave. He lingers in Kabul, so Claire's team decides to be a lot more blunt.
It is important you go now. You not listen to seniors. Very difficult for me. Seniors maybe think you're not serious.
Brother, please understand I am very serious. Now you ask for me to return. Please forgive me for not listening. I will leave. I booked ticket, but I will leave.
We see now you serious. Seniors will be happy with you travel.
Almost 3 months after Ali arrives in Afghanistan, he leaves and flies home.
No, it's a bloody good feeling, isn't it, for all the officers involved? Mission accomplished. Fantastic.
You don't always get that full closure of actually we've finished this operation, we can say we're done. So it's actually quite a rewarding operation in that way because we could actually close it off and say, yeah, we've done, we've succeeded.
Where's Ali now?
I wouldn't say. I can't say.
The rise of the terror outfit Islamic State posed a new challenge. The militant group's ambition to establish an Islamic caliphate in the Middle East came with a slick propaganda machine and a sophisticated online capability.
Islamic State were an adversary who weaponised social media. demonstrating the potent power of information and reach at scale. So Islamic State could and did reach yours and my children in their bedroom and recruited to their cause and amplified their message way beyond their physical footprint.
They were using cyber as a tool to recruit, to coordinate, to raise funds, to spread ideology. We quickly came to the conclusion that ISIS's use of the network structure around the world was a significant advantage to them. It was a significant component of their strategy. We felt strongly we have to take that away from them. We have to negate it.
Islamic State, or ISIL, came to global attention when it captured Iraq's second biggest city, Mosul, in June 2014, an event that just happened to coincide with an Australian Prime Minister's visit to the White House.
Aussies know how to fight, and I like having them in a foxhole if we're in trouble.
And soon enough, Australia was involved in a war against a new adversary.
Islamic State was a very challenging target for us to work against.
They recruited some of the best to set up their networks and their communications.
Young foreign fighters coming in from all over the world to join Islamic State, and they brought with them, a variety of technologies and means of communicating, so it was a very hard target for us to work against.
Well, it's another example of the evolution of ASD applying its capability.
2 years after Mosul's capture by Islamic State came Operation Valley Wolf, a major military offensive to liberate the city.
We're sitting in a basement in an ASD building. For about a 2-week period at the height of Valley Wolf, there was a very small team of technical cyber operators that were working in this basement around the clock. And we ended up having to explore options like putting out camp beds in the office so we could sleep next to our computers so that when the targets were online, we could be there to put an effect in place.
ASD's job in support of Operation Valley Wolf was to ensure, as best they could, safe passage of the Iraqi security forces and their international partners as they moved north from Baghdad towards Islamic State's Mosul stronghold.
As far as we know, it's the first time you've got people in the basement here in Australia, actually on computers, working at the direction of the Australian Defence Force, generating cyber effects in theatre as military ground manoeuvres are going in a way that enables the driving force to defeat the terrorists.
Operation Valley Wolf was supporting Iraqi partner forces in their movement up the Tigris River Valley as part of a prelude to the liberation of Mosul.
It was a significant and historical operation for ASD, not just in scope and complexity, but that we had tied an offensive cyber capability surgically with a ground scheme manoeuvre.
While Dan Baker was at ASD's Canberra HQ as a senior cyber operator, Sarah was dispatched to US Cyber Command at the National Security Agency in Maryland to help plan and coordinate teams in the US, Australia and Iraq.
That wasn't by chance. I kept arguing this is a great mission for the Australians. They have the capability, they have the rules of engagement, they have the authorities, they have technical capacity and capability, and they're well integrated in the ground component.
An exceptional demonstration of how non-kinetic and kinetic activities can be integrated.
ASD's cyber warriors firing bits and bytes from afar to coincide with the bombs and bullets on the ground.
Absolutely first of for Australia and suggests first for the world, generating effects through cyberspace in a very clever, precise, timed way in coordination with military manoeuvres.
We spent a lot of time analysing how ISIL communications worked, what sort of technologies they were using, how they were accessing the internet.
They found that Islamic State fighters were communicating using a variety of apps that disguised their whereabouts. These apps included SureSpot, Wicker and Telegram, among others.
The variety of communication techniques that were being used was obviously a big challenge for us.
And so the cyber tactic was born out of strategic necessity. Rather than target the use of any particular app, target the way any app worked.
Lightbolt, it was an offensive cyber capability, or you could say hacking capability, and it denied ISIL's ability to connect to the internet.
We designed the offensive cyber effects to deny their access to the internet. So it didn't matter what sort of application was being used, we could just turn off the internet and deny their access to the internet writ large.
It's a big world, and technologies, there's lots of that, so not everyone's covering everything, but in this case, right time, right place, with access and technical capabilities that could be applied to the technology being used by terrorists.
ASD's Lightbolt technique, unique to any cyber warfare unit worldwide, combined a curious mix of 1980s pop star Rick Astley, the cuddly Care Bear, and a more foreboding element, Dark Wall.
Are you a Rick Astley fan?
I think everyone that works down here is a Rick Astley fan to a certain extent.
Do you think that Rick Astley would be delighted having a cyber capability named after him?
The capability was actually named after one of our cyber technologists who developed the capability. And at the time, Rick Roll was a meme, and the capability, we were Rick rolling.
Rickrolling, Care Bear and Dark Wall are what ASD cryptically calls payloads, Trojan software surreptitiously placed on target devices. In this case, the phones, computers and internet equipment of Islamic State fighters.
We were able to put that onto the target device without ISIL having to interact with the device in any way.
Is that how good you are?
It's how good a lot of people here are.
They're brilliant at what they do, and they continue to be brilliant at what they do. That's the secret.
At critical points during the Iraqi security forces' advance up the Tigris River Valley, the payloads would be activated from a basement a few metres underground in Canberra, 13,000 kilometres away.
Synchronising very, very carefully our cyber effects with a commander in the field who was moving troops around in order to give that commander the advantage that they needed.
Military commanders in Iraq had ASD's cyber tricks at their disposal. Rickrolling was the simplest of ASD's payloads, even if it was more of an inconvenience than a permanent impairment to the enemy's communications.
Certainly an average ISIL fighter would, the equivalent of turn on and off, some simple troubleshooting with someone with a little bit more technical know-how, they would be able to reverse it.
If an ISIL fighter needs to leave their position, in order to go and reset a device, well, they've just exposed themselves to our partner forces. So even though it was a simple cyber effect, using it tightly coordinated with partner forces created a disproportionate effect in some cases.
And when Islamic State fighters defeated Rickrolling, ASD stepped up its arsenal of cyber offensive tools with Care Bear, a far trickier prospect for the enemy. They'd need a lot more technical nous to get around it.
It would require more advanced IT sophistication to reverse that. They would likely have to call on their IT support to service that.
But even Care Bear proved ineffective in some instances. Such was the sophistication of Islamic State's technical proficiency. They managed to get back on the internet despite the interference from a bunker in Australia. ASD decided a third type of cyberstrike was needed.
Yeah, Dark Wall, which was actually developed very, very quickly on the fly. We were able to draw on many, many years of experience in building disruptive payloads in order to turn around a capability very, very quickly.
This was a hard denial of their ability to connect to the internet.
We made an assessment that ISIL would be unable to reverse that effect and restore the targeted equipment to functioning properly. So it prevented them from being able to communicate effectively with each other, and that ultimately added additional friction, which our partner forces were able to exploit as they moved up the valley.
With their phones not working, some Islamic State fighters used radios to communicate. That effectively put beacons on their location, allowing coalition air and ground strikes on enemy positions.
We were driving them in a direction where we could expose them in a way that the conventional military, the kinetic military, could then step in and take direct physical action.
But take him out, basically.
Yeah.
We actually received very good feedback from the ground commanders that they saw a shift in communications and that the Iraqi security forces were able to confidently take terrain with advantage.
The ability of ASD and ADF to integrate closely with the ground commander set a foundational precedent for how we operate most effective with ground maneuver elements.
Being able to employ a cyber capability, an offensive cyber capability at the decisive moment is something that's able to deliver significant advantage in a kinetic fight.
When the operation started, ASD had 14 target devices, which grew to 47, against which there were 81 cyber strikes by ASD from its Canberra HQ. Operation Valley Wolf saw the recapture of Kayara West Air Base, which became the staging post for the eventual liberation of Mosul. And while coalition forces were repelling Islamic State on the ground with the assistance of ASD's cyber warriors, another part of ASD was targeting the militant group's propaganda unit using similar techniques.
It's getting access to people's computers or computers used by the media machine. And once you've got access, what you do next is a matter of intent. You could steal information to see what they're up to, what the media they're planning, or you could deny access to those computers from their legitimate users, or remove and delete material which stops them from promulgating their message.
We'd watch, what was going on in terms of the fight against ISIL on the news, and I think, everyone, working in this basement was able to see the link between what was going on in Syria and Iraq and the fight against ISIL, and what they were coming into work and doing, every day, or spending their nights doing.
The agency's extraordinary ability to command and control devices remotely on the battlefield helps explain why ASD advised the federal government to effectively ban Huawei and another Chinese company from the 5G network.
You have to trust the equipment you're using. And if you have equipment that is actually developed in a country where under law they're required to give access to and support the nation state for intelligence or disruptive purposes, that risk could not be mitigated.
Now, Australia was the first to come to the conclusion, we don't like the risk. We just don't think it's something that we should allow.
All of our technical advice is informed by both the top secret intelligence we can collect and also our own capabilities and what we're capable of doing, on the assumption that if we could do things, so could another well-resourced intelligence apparatus.
ASD's sophisticated cyber skills, honed in war and counter-terrorism, were on constant deployment during the COVID-19 pandemic.
The cyber criminals did really prey on the fear and uncertainty of Australians during this period.
They didn't miss a beat. They were on it almost straight away.
Anxiety was high in the early days of COVID. Australians warned that without extraordinary measures, the death toll from the virus would quickly steeple.
An all but deserted city on day 3 of a
We're not out of the woods. See no additional community transmission.
The state recorded another 64 cases today. Illness, misery and death.
The Australian government response to COVID to support individuals with financial payments was an incredible honeypot for the world's cyber criminals, and we saw them come here in droves.
Cyber criminals, as craft as they are, were a wasted good crisis, and they were very quick to leverage capabilities that existed within that cybercrime world to target vulnerable Australians.
There was a particular set of actors that we knew were impersonating the Australian government.
Text and email scams targeting the MyGov website, the COVID Safe app, among others, seeking to steal personal and financial information.
This one here, it looks like it's coming from not only the Department of Health, but also in relation to the World Health Organisation.
They were very quick to see what messaging was being put out and then use that for their own nefarious purposes.
And the mere clicking of that would mean that this nasty virus, effectively, would be on your device?
Yeah, so it would redirect to a website where the malware was hosted and you would unknowingly download it onto your device.
Clever enough with their technology, for example, to put that in your chain of MyGov SMS messages that you might have legitimately been receiving when you were logging into your MyGov account.
The government's decision to allow early release of superannuation savings made for a particularly lucrative target for the scammers.
We did notice a correlation between a number of campaigns targeting Australians, and that was this particular malware variant.
In other words, many of the COVID-themed scams that had already stolen money and personal data from Australians seem to be using the same Trojan malware. ASD had its target.
We don't like to play whack-a-mole with the petty criminals. We want to take our time to work up the network to get to the very heart of the criminal syndicate, because going after the top of the heap is going to be a better bang for our buck.
We wanted to go after a decent big fish, the one that was really going after Australians, and we identified who that was, or at least a syndicate behind it, and we set off a trail of events, investigations, technical capabilities, online operators to go back against them and get rid of them.
The agency knew exactly where to find this big fish, the dark web. A hangout for those plotting cyber mayhem.
What is the dark web?
It's a little bit hard to get to, but it's like a giant black market online criminal space where you can procure all sorts of horrific services.
We did stalk them pretty hard online.
You could say it was Eastern European.
One of the main platforms they were operating on was a predominantly Russian-speaking platform, but it attracts cyber criminals from all around the globe.
Having found the malware, ASD bought it for a few $1,000s and found its vulnerability. The expert team could have destroyed it then and there.
Wham bam, thank you ma'am isn't always the best response.
Better to disable the malware and then set about ruining the supplier's business model.
We try to reverse engineer it and understand how it's working and operating, but we also need to get in and understand how the network of criminals is operating, who's associated to who.
Well, we took care of the technical bit, and then we did some other things to take care of their reputation.
The dark web is a very active community, and it is built on reputation and trust. This is actually a private conversation we had with the actor.
So you're basically laying the groundwork for the next step, which is to start spreading your dissatisfaction with this malware.
Exactly, yes, that's correct. So this was a conversation that followed a couple of days after, where the actor responded to us and essentially pretty harshly changed their tone in terms of saying that, you know, they were looking into it and now it's not their problem and it's our problem, and it's just the fact that we don't know how to read instructions.
ASD's disruption operation and campaign of cyber badmouthing started paying off.
When you were poking around the database, you could see that it wasn't just Australians who were being ripped off. Where were the victims?
It was global. South America, North America, Europe, Asia. It impacted everywhere.
They were experiencing a lot more, I guess, frustrations online, and a lot of their affiliates had been coming out saying that things weren't working and they weren't happy.
If your bots die, this is your problem. So he's just trying to wash his hands of it.
Yeah.
Reputation ruined by ASD's operation, the cyber criminals' outrageously successful malware business immediately dried up.
Lots of money coming in, I would say, in the millions.
And we knew from our investigations that it was targeting tens of thousands of people globally. So Operation Crystal Dagger had a significant impact on the ability for these cyber criminals to continue their campaigns.
Yes, there are probably tens of thousands of people around the world who would never know that ASD prevented them from falling victim to a cyber criminal.
ASD's secret army of super-skilled cyber sleuths are an unusual lot by design and self-selection. A fair few of them might be considered a bit eccentric, oddballs even, but their collective and individual genius is a unique asset.
They are clever, creative, and are people who do things with technology that it was not designed for. And the most important thing that I can do as a leader of the organisation is create the space in the ASD for people like that to flourish and innovate within our walls, because that is our warfighting edge.
Sally Walker, Britain's former chief cyber spy, says having differently wired brains or neurodiversity is immensely valuable in code breaking, and has been since World War II.
So we had dyslexic brains that see in 3D and could do wiring maps and network the world, but couldn't write an application form. Different skill sets.
So genius is disguised by difference, or is it a part of genius?
I think geniuses come in all kinds of different packages. And I worked with a lot of them. They all thought they were ordinary. They were extraordinary.
They're a great team. You need a great team to do offensive cyber. Quirky, some of the smartest people I've met. And it can be sometimes intimidating, but it's the power of everyone's expertise coming together to support a common problem.
If some of your colleagues weren't working for the ASD, where would they be working?
They could be doing a lot of damage.
Hopefully we're keeping some of them out of trouble by employing them to hack for the Australian government rather than having them put their skills to more nefarious uses.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine tells us what future warfare looks like. Conventional military assault synchronised with cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, designed to cripple computer networks running electricity, banking, telecommunications and government systems.
This is the place where the contemporary warfare in the cyber is taking place. Those who are present here will learn a lot how to actually defend the country.
Vladimir Putin, like many of us, thought that in a cyber conflict, the sea of vulnerability that we all have to defend is so great that his capability would be sufficient.
Not only did he overestimate his own capabilities, he totally underestimated Ukrainian capabilities.
The might of Moscow's cyber sophistication didn't secure the quick victory the Russian president had assumed, in part because the Five Eyes nations, including Australia, had been watching long before the eventual invasion.
We are in the window when an invasion could begin at any time, should Vladimir Putin decide to order it. I will not comment on the details of our intelligence information.
The Five Eyes knew an invasion was being planned and decided to reveal what it suspected was about to happen, in the hope Putin might reconsider.
And I've said to my Five Eyes partners that that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying all at once. Because, of course, there's no point in collecting intelligence if it can't be used for good. But the challenge of managing the release of intelligence with the risk that the adversary will understand how you collected that intelligence and block your way in the future is a really difficult balance to be struck.
Vladimir Putin chanced his luck anyway, disregarding how Five Eyes and its NATO allies might have known of his plans to invade Ukraine. Putin put great faith in a military force supplemented in ways never seen before.
There has definitely been a blurring of cyber criminals and state actors in cyberspace.
Pro-Kremlin hackers who'd been making millions of dollars through online scams during the pandemic conscripted into Russia's invasion plans for Ukraine.
It's not by chance that the greatest single concentration of cyber criminal gangs in the world is in Russia. Our view was the Russian government was giving them some level of protection.
That blending of criminal world with the Russian political world leads to the creation of the criminal terrorist state called Russia.
These Russian-based ransomware hackers from a group called REvil were raided by local authorities in early 2023 after sustained international pressure on the Kremlin. REvil is suspected of being sponsored by Russia's intelligence bureau, the FSB, and the group was behind the attack on Medibank that affected 10 million Australians.
What we know for sure is that unfortunately REvil continues to operate today.
But Ukraine has undergone its own recruitment drive from the dark side.
Ukrainian cyber criminals put down their tools of crime and involve themselves in both the cyber defence of Ukraine but also in undertaking attacks against Russian targets.
Full-fledged cyber war is happening here today. We don't see it on the streets, but down in the digital domain, it's a full-fledged war.
A war that has substantial Australian and Five Eyes involvement, not in the trenches or in the air, but in cyber combat, in defence and offence.
Without going into any details, it's very important in a current conflict that we don't speak out of turn. I think it's pretty plain on the face of it that a number of things are going on. One is that Ukraine is focused on its continued cyber defence, and there are many nations assisting it in that regard.
Russia has been executing different activities against Ukraine, both on the cyber, on the military front, and information warfare. And conventional war today comprises of these three elements, and we all need to pay attention to all three.
Because cyber assault is ever present, whether nations are in declared conflict or not, in the grey zone between war and peace.
Our people here at ASD are every day in some form of hand-to-hand combat in cyberspace.
There were many of us in the West who were fearful that it's just too hard to defend our vulnerabilities. And the Ukrainians have given us some hope that that is not the case, and that cybersecurity done well, done by a team across citizens, industry and the government part of the community can actually win in this conflict.
And in the bigger struggle between democracy and authoritarianism, the cyber resilience shown in the defence of Ukraine has a broader strategic value.
I hope that the Chinese take the insight from what's going on in Ukraine. The use of armed force against other nations will not go unpunished, and other nations will respond and will stand up. You know, something like invading Taiwan, not really a good choice.
As we've seen, the work of the modern cyber warrior isn't victimless. It's deadly serious, arguably more than ever. Of course, there's much we'll never know about the darker side of what's done. But what is clear is that Australia's modern-day codebreakers are driven by the belief they stand at the frontier between even uglier forms of war and fragile peace, just as it was back where it all began, in a hot Brisbane garage.
All's fair in love and war and espionage, so may the best spy win.
One less attack, one less person being killed, in the end, keeping Australians safe.
Keep it peaceful. Help to keep it peaceful if you can. Do whatever you can. War's terrible.
We just did our bit. Just did our bit. Yes.
Miss Joyce Grace and the late Miss Coral Hines awarded the Australian Intelligence Medal.